I was simply installing solar panels on my own roof. Nothing loud, no party, no fire hazard, just clean, green energy. But in the blink of an eye, my peaceful morning turned into a nightmare. 1 minute, I'm tightening a bracket, and the next, I have 2 patrol cars parked in my driveway because the HOA president decided my roof looked too industrial. I moved to this neighborhood for peace and space, not to be harassed for going green. And the worst part? She acted like she was saving the entire neighborhood from destruction. Ever had an HOA go too far? Share your story in the comments below. I want to hear it. It all started the morning I began the installation. The weather was perfect, my equipment was top-notch, and my technical knowledge, backed by years of experience with building codes, was on point. I was up on my ladder, securing the 4th panel when I heard footsteps crunching on my gravel driveway. Glancing down, I saw a woman walking toward me with the kind of purposeful stride that immediately put me on alert. Mid-40s, blonde hair perfectly styled, clipboard in hand. She looked like she meant business. Her approach wasn't just formal. It was a power move, like she'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror a dozen times. Her smile was polite, but there was an unmistakable aura of authority, intimidation wrapped in a facade of friendliness. She was the president of the Forest Ridge Homeowners Association. "Good morning," she said, her voice both friendly and threatening. "I'm Eileen Marlowe, president of the HOA. I trust you've reviewed our community guidelines, especially the sections about visual harmony and neighborhood aesthetics." She made it sound like I was putting up a neon casino sign instead of sleek black solar panels. Panels that would, by the way, increase my property value. I climbed down from the ladder, trying to stay polite despite the tension in the air. "Albert Carter," I said, forcing a smile. "Nice to meet you, Eileen. These panels are up to code and fully permitted by the county." Her smile grew strained. She looked over my installation with the kind of disapproval usually reserved for major public health violations. "Well, Albert," she said, consulting her clipboard with dramatic importance, "county permits are just the minimum. Our community has much higher standards than what the government considers acceptable." She gestured to my solar panels like they were a blight on the neighborhood. Even though they were premium, blend in perfectly with my roof shingles. "We need to maintain property values and aesthetic appeal for everyone who's invested their life savings here," she added, her tone making it clear this wasn't a friendly conversation. This was an inspection from someone who had already decided I was guilty of something. As she handed me her business card with the HOA logo embossed in gold, she added something that caught me off guard and chilled me to the bone. "You know," she began, "just last year, there was a terrible cabin fire caused by DIY electrical work. Thank God no one died, but the whole structure was engulfed in flames. Emergency evacuations, families displaced." She painted a vivid, terrifying picture of chaos and destruction, but something didn't sit right. It felt more like a control tactic, not a genuine concern. Still, the story made me second-guess my installation, and that's exactly what she wanted. As she walked away, I noticed her glancing back at my property, her eyes narrow with disapproval. From my elevated position on the hillside, I could see directly into her windows across the valley, and all day, I caught glimpses of her silhouette, watching me. It didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like being under surveillance by someone just waiting for me to slip up. The feeling deepened as evening approached. As I finished cleaning up my tools, I saw the lights still blazing in her house. And there she was, standing by her window, staring right at my property. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop the installation or face consequences." I stared at the screen. For the first time in years, I felt unsafe in my own home, not because of what I was building, but because of who was watching. 3 days later, I received something that would change everything, a formal cease and desist letter from the HOA. It claimed I was in violation of a non-existent rule, Rule 15B, one that supposedly governs solar installations. The language was official, almost threatening, but there was one problem. I had the original HOA contract, and Rule 15B didn't exist. I dug deeper. Turns out, the community had voted to reject the very rule Eileen was using to threaten me, and she was enforcing it anyway, using fake legal threats to stop my project. This wasn't about aesthetics or safety, it was about control. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. Eileen wasn't just trying to enforce a rule. She was making up rules and bullying residents into submission. How many other homeowners had she manipulated with fake threats? How many had just given up, believing they were in the wrong? Now, it's time for me to take action. This isn't just about solar panels anymore. It's about standing up to someone who's trying to control everything under the guise of community standards. Have you had an HOA try to pull something like this? Let me know in the comments. Share your stories, your experiences, and let's take back our peace. It was the kind of scenario you hear about in HOA horror stories, an overzealous neighbor wielding fake authority, hiding behind official-looking paperwork, and using intimidating legal language to bully people into submission. But this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a full-on scam, dressed in HOA letterhead and backed by nothing but empty threats. I quickly realized this wasn't just a difficult neighbor. This was a calculated con artist using her position to take control of people who trusted her, exploiting their lack of knowledge to manipulate them. Her attack wasn't based on any real rules. It was a paper-based heist, and I wasn't going to let it stand. That night, I made a vow. No one should have to endure this kind of harassment, especially those trying to live peacefully and contribute to a greener world. The next morning, I was determined to continue my solar panel installation with full legal rights and proper permits in, but when I stepped outside, something was very wrong. My extension ladder, the one I had left safely against the cabin, was gone. Not misplaced or knocked over. It had vanished completely. And the fresh tire tracks leading away from my property told a story I didn't want to hear. Someone had stolen my equipment in the dead of night. I didn't have to guess who was behind it. I knew. Refusing to let this setback derail my project, I borrowed a ladder from a neighbor and was back at work by 7 a.m. But just as I was securing the fifth panel, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable wail of sirens cutting through the morning calm. 2 police cruisers came up the narrow mountain road toward my cabin, lights flashing like I was the target of a major federal raid. My stomach dropped as I realized the officers were heading straight for my property. What emergency could possibly involve my perfectly legal, carefully planned solar installation? The lead officer stepped out, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Sir, we've received a report about unsafe construction practices and immediate fire hazards. You need to stop work and come down here so we can discuss the situation." I was stunned. Here I was, conducting a perfectly legitimate project with all the necessary permits and professional-grade equipment, and I was being treated like some kind of criminal. To make matters worse, an audience of curious neighbors had gathered, making it feel like a public shaming session. I climbed down from my ladder, my every move watched by at least 10 people, all wondering what kind of crime I was being accused of. It felt like a block party for my humiliation, with no one offering so much as a snack. Officer Rodriguez, the lead cop, tried to keep his cool as he explained the situation. "Ma'am called 911 about immediate fire danger," he said, his tone patient but confused. "She reported exposed wires, structural violations, and installation practices that were a threat to the entire neighborhood." I immediately handed over all my permits, engineering documentation, and county credentials. But despite all this, protocol required that I suspend work pending a safety investigation by the county building inspector. "I'm sure this will get sorted out soon," Rodriguez said with an apologetic shrug. But I wasn't going to be intimidated. I wasn't just fighting to install solar panels. I was fighting to expose the fraud that was threatening to destroy everything I had worked for. The perfect moment in this entire saga arrived on a crystal-clear morning, 8 weeks after everything had been resolved. I was sitting on my deck with my first cup of coffee, watching the sunlight kiss the surface of my solar panels, calculating how much I was already saving on my electric bills. Suddenly, I heard the familiar sound of a vehicle approaching slowly on the mountain road below. I looked down and saw a sheriff's department transport van making its way toward the county courthouse. Through the reinforced rear window, I caught a glimpse of Eileen in her orange county jail uniform, being transported for her sentencing hearing on multiple felony fraud charges. The irony was palpable. Officer Rodriguez, the same cop who'd responded to her fake 911 call about my dangerous solar installation, was riding behind the van in his patrol car. When he saw me on my deck, he rolled down his window, gave me a respectful nod, and flashed a thumbs up. It was a perfect full-circle moment, the universe's way of confirming that justice had finally been served. I watched Eileen's silhouette shrink as the van turned the corner, disappearing from sight. It wasn't about revenge, it was about repair. For every lie, every fabricated rule, every ounce of fear she'd spread, she was now facing the consequences. I raised my coffee mug in a quiet salute as the vehicles disappeared around the bend. Eileen would be spending the next several years in state prison, reflecting on the consequences of her systematic fraud, her abuse of authority, and the decision to target someone who happened to know more about building codes and financial investigations than she ever bothered to research. 6 months later, after all legal proceedings and appeals were exhausted, it turned out that Eileen's final desperate threat about my pension records was just another lie. Nothing was wrong with my county pension, my employment records, or my professional credentials. It was simply another manipulation attempt by someone whose entire life was based on deception and intimidation. Meanwhile, the new HOA board, led by Hank, made significant strides in transparency and governance. Town halls were held every month, budgets were posted publicly, and residents were actually showing up, because for the first time in years, they mattered. Under Hank's leadership, Forest Ridge Homeowners Association became a model of transparent finances and democratically approved rules. And I had the honor of serving as the unofficial legal and regulatory consultant, helping ensure that future decisions were grounded in actual laws and legitimate authority. As for my solar installation, it continues to operate efficiently, and my mountain views remain as breathtaking as ever. Every morning, I wake up grateful that I chose to fight systemic corruption instead of quietly accepting it. The final irony? Eileen's desperate attempts to halt my legally permitted, environmentally responsible solar installation ended up exposing a massive fraud scheme that had been draining the community for years and undermining the trust between HOA leadership and the residents. Sometimes, standing up to bullies and demanding accountability uncovers a much bigger issue than you initially thought. And in the end, against all odds, the good guys do win. If you enjoyed watching me take down this corrupt HOA president and expose her fraudulent scheme, hit the like button and let me know in the comments. What's the worst HOA horror story you've ever heard or experienced? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your stories. Remember, knowledge is power, and sometimes the best defense against corruption is simply refusing to be intimidated by those who think a clipboard and official letterhead make them untouchable. Thank you for joining me today, and don't forget to subscribe for more Story Sofka.